Hello, everyone. My name is Cory Morales, and I'll be talking about the Compulsory Education Act of China. Now, I've lived in Shanghai about 4 years and worked in a school setting in early childhood education for the same amount of time, so I feel like I could provide some insight on this topic. Now, the Compulsory Education Law of the People's Republic of China was first established in 1986. The law basically guarantees the right to compulsory education of all school-age children. Now, school-age children can be classified from the ages of 6 to 15 years old. So the education will be guaranteed by the state in the form of a 9-year system. Previously, before 1986, there was no such law, so literacy rates in China were very sporadic and not very consistent among the whole nation. Now, all children must receive this education. It is absolutely mandatory, unless the child is ill or has any other special circumstances. Now, in these scenarios, the parents of this child would have to go to their local or state office and provide some type of information and submit some forms in this case. Now, implementation of this law is guaranteed public welfare from the state. So there's no tuition fees or any other fees that would be. So there's no tuition fees or any other fees that the parents would be responsible in this scenario. Now, obviously, with this first coming out in 1986, there's definitely some pros and some cons, and some strengths and some weaknesses to this initial law. Now, talking about the strengths. Obviously, it solved a lot of problems of lack of school options in rural and impoverished areas. China has the largest population in the world, and it had at the time, and China has the largest population and has the largest need for education in its country. And naturally, there's many areas in China that weren't able to get the proper education to be literate. So this addressed that, and it also planned to increase all the literacy rates amongst all Chinese citizens. Previously, their literacy rates fluctuated around 65 to 70% before this law even passed, and there was a big disparity between men and women as well. So this was a massive project to tackle and to provide just a more educated and literate nation overall. Obviously, there's a lot of weaknesses, and some of these weaknesses do get addressed in some later revisions. So naturally, housing prices near the top schools skyrocketed. At its inception in 1986, there were many schools that received a lot of government backing, received a lot of money, and many schools in these rural areas weren't able to receive nearly as much capital and finances to provide a great education for the students. So this is one problem that only families that were very wealthy and had a lot of money were able to receive the best education possible. Now, also another huge issue with this initial plan was that traditional examination-focused education was the dominant form of education delivery. And as we've gone on many years in the future, we've realized that this is definitely not the best way to teach young language learners and just young children in general. It was a very textbook-style, lecture-based learning, and this obviously isn't the most fun way to teach for teachers either. So the education, although it was spread out amongst the whole country and they were beginning to standardize it, there were still a lot of flaws in their initial plan. Obviously, there were some revisions made in 2006 that tackled some of these problems, and we'll see some of the outcomes and we'll see some of the outcomes from which the initial plan And we'll see some of the outcomes that happened based on the initial plan in 1986 and after the revisions in 2006. From 1986 to 2018, the literacy rates jumped from around that 65 to 70% mark to 97% in the whole country. So obviously, it accomplished its goal, as the initial goal, which was to provide literacy to the whole country. So it obviously far exceeded their expectations and was massively successful in that regard. Obviously, the equality of education also began to spread out and become a bit more evenly distributed to rural areas. As stated previously, most of the focus was on the top schools, and now with time there's been more of a division, and smaller cities, tier 2, tier 3 cities are still able to, even tier 4 and tier 5 cities are still able to receive very quality education. And the standardized approach definitely helped with that, obviously allowing for easy implementation into other schools. So that way when a new school is built, then they can implement all the compulsory education laws that come into the total law. Children also being exempt from entrance exams, which was a massive change as well. There was a huge competition, especially getting into top schools, private schools, international schools for the children, and many had to interview, they have to do entrance exams. So there's a lot of pressure on the young children, which and now they're making a lot of changes to move away from that, which is excellent. Now it obviously created some challenges for public and private schools because there are very specific guidelines on what classifies as compulsory education. So this affected the textbooks they use, the style of lesson that they need to be delivered. So there was a lot of issues initially that went into this. Now there was also a lot of impact and different conclusions that were made. Just come in.
Fine.
Okay. I'm just pausing it right now. Yeah. Go quick so I can finish recording. Obviously, there was a huge impact and a lot of conclusions that came from the initial law and after the revisions in 2006. Now, with the rise in competition amongst the whole nation, it opened the door for different styles of learning, such as Montessori and STEM and STEAM schools, especially in the form of preschools that start before the compulsory education, which parents are striving to provide an academic and educational advantage over other students. So we've seen a massive rise in these types of programs. And obviously with the increased competition of education, the demand for English skyrocketed. So this created a whole another job market for expats to come in and teach English in China. Now there's many places in China, even rural areas, that have English centers and English teachers. So it created a whole new niche that was a huge demand as the education ramped up. And like I said before, parents enrolling children in school early to give educational advantage. So preschools, private schools, all on the rise. And obviously the law provided literacy and education for the whole nation, which actually extremely stimulated the economy for the entire population. China's seen massive economic growth in the past 10, 20, even 30 years. So education is a small part of that, and also created education was a huge part of that and created a lot of opportunity and a lot of economic growth for the state of China as a whole. Now, some issues that could arise in the future would be the lack of universities in China that would limit the educational growth beyond the compulsory education. So with this increased competition, we think about what could be next. Currently, there are only roughly under 3,000 universities in China. So that only means about 12 million people will have access to higher education. So moving forward, China, this might be something that China needs to address because they solve their literacy rates and are providing a higher education to their whole nation. But the opportunities for people to go to university and college and even study abroad are still fairly limited. So in the future, I feel this is something that's going to need to get addressed if China wants to continue this upward mobility and upward growth moving forward. And I'm sure in the future there may be some more revisions in the compulsory education law of China, as we've learned that education is continuing to grow and move into a more technology-based. Education is continuing to grow and move into more technology-heavy learning, and implementation of technology in the curriculum is becoming far more common. So and as technology grows, we can definitely understand that technology in the classroom is becoming more and more commonplace. So moving forward, I feel it's something that China will definitely have to address and continue to update this law to make it more relevant as we move forward into the future.